good to see you again, Andy.
It's lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. So, did you have a good lunch?
A delightful one, thanks, except for the finale. But and then, how are you keeping? So, what have you been up to since we last spoke? Last year.
Well, focusing on creativity, focusing on leadership, and and just keeping my mind active in terms of moving forward rather than simply regurgitating what we
Yeah,
all.
absolutely. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I suppose, like with the theme this year being stories, I suppose what I've been thinking about most recently is this distinction between what we call the life sciences and the social sciences. And
Yeah.
the social sciences focus very much on, subjective reality and, concepts such as identity and values and beliefs, they tend to be very subjective, whereas the life sciences focus on material reality, facts, logic, and things that can be understood in a way that we can make generalizations, we can raise our awareness of them as like, what is the truth? And so, whereas when we think about stories, stories are not based on absolute truth. They are subjective versions of our reality, and we interpret truth the way we see fit according to our context. Whereas the life sciences, it's like, regardless of the context, you do X plus Y and that will equal Z in any situation.
That's it. Interesting. I mean, what would you say to people who would say, is there such a thing as absolute truth?
Well, I mean, I'm a social scientist, so I couldn't kind of consider an absolute truth, because I come, not only am I a social scientist, I come from the approach that we have versions of reality based on who
Yeah.
based on our context, whereas there are scientists who believe in absolute truth, and they will spend their whole lifetimes searching for that absolute truth, and sometimes people feel that they have found the absolute truth, and then a few decades later those theories are disproved. And
Yeah.
whereas a story isn't, we can't disprove a story. A story can change and it can be adapted, but it can't be, disproved.
As a newspaper editor once said, why let the facts get in the way of a good story?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, yes. So yourself, how do you position yourself? I mean, I have my assumptions about, I think that you may not have responded to my invitation to have a conversation with me about identity, values, and behaviors if you didn't believe in this subjective version of reality and
Yeah.
stories, right? So the reason I say that is because very often we end up having conversations with people who have similar values. And so even though we may continue to agree with each other, I suppose we need to keep aware of the fact that not everyone would agree with what we...
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the themes of my activity, in one of my key activities, is the idea of convivial disagreement.
Mhm.
In fact, in the 18th century, I believe, I'd like to do more research on this, but they were like convivial societies, where it was seen as perfectly acceptable to have a disagreement. Whereas I think we now live in an era where there's a lot of social pressure on conformity and an intolerance of ambiguity, which I think presents its own challenges.
Yes, there is a kind of intolerance to viewpoints that we feel are very different to our own, and viewpoints that maybe historically were acceptable viewpoints but no longer are. So yeah, are we referring to this kind of cancel culture?
Yes, very much. That's a dimension to it. I think there's various ingredients from a response to complexity, that you establish a worldview that provides coherence and clarity. But in my view, there's a danger of a cost to in our work on the Dublin conversations. We've got a concept called purposeful trust, And purposeful trust is the trust that enables all of us to have come together, coexist, cooperate, and collaborate. And the danger, like in like extreme cases, such as like cancel culture, undermines that central purposeful trust, that well that we'll draw upon to interact. But the careful is that the well could either run dry or get polluted, and we then don't have this vital ingredient that enables us to engage with others.
And you're using metaphors there, like the well running dry, for example. And I suppose one of the beauties of stories is that they're very often filled with metaphors and analogies and, you know, and kind of imagery that we can interpret according to our own context, according to how it's relevant to us.
Certainly metaphors are, as someone who spent a career in communications, I regard metaphors as perhaps one of the most powerful communication tool, but also metaphors as an agent for decoding and interpreting our reality, particularly in an era of greater complexity. A metaphor is a great tool for at least getting the first steps in understanding complexity. You know, so how is this situation like? And so there's different ways of categorizing complexity, from critical, tame, wicked. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Tubespiration about how to get your ideas on the London Underground, and I adopted the idea of Zone 1 for critical problems, Zone 6 for tame, and Zone 10 for wicked. And so with Zone 10 problems or wicked problems, I think metaphors are a brilliant way to build a bridge between your lack of understanding and danger of being overwhelmed by the complexity, and making a start in grappling with that and decoding it to make it less complex and more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so metaphorically, how do you relate identity, values, and beliefs?
Metaphorically, and it goes back to the theme of story, in the sense of what is your story of self? And since we last met, I've focused much of my energies on this concept of purpose and being purposeful. And therefore, in your being purposeful, you have a story to yourself about what you think is purposeful. You have a narrative of why your purpose is significant to wider society, that then also then feeds back into this story of self. So certainly in terms of beliefs, values, and identity, they're absolutely fundamental in terms of having an understanding of oneself, but also then in terms of how you can then engage with others. And so I believe in the area of purpose and being purposeful is that bridge to enable like the outstanding creative person to connect, cooperate, collaborate with others to achieve a greater creative goal. So I'm passionate that if you have a view about your own purpose, that gives you both clarity in your self-talk, your script you provide yourself to go forward, but also gives clarity to others about who you are, and almost acts like a lighthouse in a sense of attracting like-minded or suitable people to your cause, to you, to begin a conversation.
And, you know, earlier I talked about the difference between the life sciences and the social sciences, whereas the life sciences, they look at our reality from the material point of view and the facts about the person. And so the fact about me is that I'm of a different race to you. And unless we look at the stories, our stories may be very similar. Our stories may be, like much closer in terms of our values. Whereas when we look at the material facts, the races, you know, the identity can be, we can only see the differences. And so I find that sometimes when people are dehumanized solely to their material kind of being, you know, that person is either masculine or feminine, you know, or they're either a man or a woman, that's a fact. or in
Well, there are those who would disagree with that, but yeah.
course, you know, so that is an example of something which has changed over time. You know, like 20 years ago, that's how we categorized people materially, you know, in the life sciences. It's like, these are men and these are women. These are people of African origin and these are people of Asian origin. These are Europeans. And so we put people into categories based on their genetics, based on, you know, the visible differences between them. But when we look at stories from the social science perspective, it's like, well, you know, unless we ask somebody what their story is not visible unless it is explored.
I would strongly counter that, because I would suggest that we are walking brands on legs, and we send out signals. So even if I don't, if you don't see me but you can hear me speak, or just if you see me but you don't hit, we don't communicate and speak to each other, there's still a conversation going on about your value judgments you make about that person, who they are, their age, their appearance, presumptions and assumptions about them. So I would challenge that there's a sort of interpretation begins with the conversation, but you know, the power of non-verbal signals is incredibly important.
Right. Yeah. So the interaction, perhaps then. So, for example, let's say authors that I have never met, I might have read their books, or I might not even have read their books. I've heard other people talking about the books that these people have written. I still kind of, let's say a good example, the woman who wrote Harry Potter books. What's her name?
J.K. Rowling. Yeah,
that's right, J.K. I've never met J.K. Rowling. I've never read any of Harry Potter's books, but having heard what other people say, a story has formed about her. I don't see her as a woman as such. I see her as a story, a story that has created many stories. You know, she is a story in herself.
Which I believe, you know, each and every one of us is. We're a story that we tell to ourselves in our self-talk, and a story that we use in our social interactions to achieve what we call our social purpose. So in my work on this year in a project called the Dublin Conversations, where we're really creating a sort of a new world view on, initially developed for the communications industry, but a more universal purpose, where we're looking to create a bigger, wider, deeper, seamless, and more integrated view that help us understand our reality better. And the challenge we have is, as I say, it's question marks whether something, you know, from a life science view, is there an absolute truth? And what we're suggesting is that you know, our life is governed by perceptions. Our perceptions, influenced by Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral psychologist, we've come up with a conceptual model that we engage with others using 5 key heuristics of being known, liked, trusted, front of mind, and being talked about. And we believe in the Dublin Conversations that by managing those 5 dimensions, you can manage then your social interactions. So going back to the question then of like beliefs, identity, and value, it's really, I mean, like, what beliefs do you want to be known for? What beliefs do you want to be liked for? What beliefs can you trust? What beliefs are evident in front of mind? What beliefs do others say about you? So you can see that we believe it's hopefully a useful tool to enable us to decode these signals and create a more effective map to guide us in how we interact with each other.
Okay, and so that is a reality. That's a theory basically that you have accepted, and a theory that you're using. And so with this theoretical framework for the stories that you are creating and co-creating with those that you communicate with, you know, what is the value in terms of like looking across distance and time and spaces, and very alternative realities to the one that you've adopted?
Well, it's quite fundamental because on this sort of the mechanics of storytelling, what one common mistake people make is assuming the words stories and narratives are the same. Whereas I would suggest that if I can use the analogy of a pearl necklace, the pearls are the stories, and the string holding the pearls together is a narrative. And so a narrative is critical because it builds a bridge between you and the wider world, both in sense of like your purpose, and an emotional dimension, and in how you are socially accepted or not accepted. So going forward, the idea of stories and narratives are fundamental. That if you've got an idea, you have to have a script, a self-script that gives you the confidence to go forward with that idea, that gives you the confidence to engage with others. And then that script has got to work in a supportive way. And the story and narrative's got to work in a supportive way to get people to agree to coexist, cooperate, or collaborate. So, say the idea, the stories are a vital. They work like both a lubricant, glue, and gel in terms of different people in different contexts, but to build that connectivity.
I suppose in the current context, the government's narrative is that everyone should be vaccinated. That's the narrative, and there will be many stories to illustrate, to confirm why that narrative is the correct narrative. So there's an agenda associated with that narrative. There is, whereas the stories are used to, to add support, to confirm that the agenda is the right one.
Yes, absolutely. So an individual might make a decision like, I'm going to get vaccinated or not get vaccinated. And each of those decisions then has a repercussion on their narrative of signifying to others what that action has significance for them. In terms of might be affirming, yes, you're one of the people if you're pro-vaccine, and no if you're anti-vaccine. And so, yeah, so the adage, no one is an island, is very profound. That if you're got the most brilliant creative brain that's capable of phenomenal divergent and convergent thinking, but you know, there's a myth of the lone genius, and you need to connect with other people, and the vehicle for connecting with other people is stories, which have at their heart a character, which is then has the architecture of beliefs, values, and identity within it.
And as you say, the common thread, in the pearl necklace, the thread which holds the pearls together, holds the stories together, is the narrative. And with the current pandemic, there is a narrative and there are many counter narratives, and it's about positioning ourselves in the narrative that that is in alignment with our values, and then we find the stories that confirm that what we believe is true.
Well, I would add to this that the concept of story memes. So a meme is how a cultural artifact can connect within people. So Richard Dawkins originally coined the term to provide that genes provided a form of biological transmission. Memes provide a form of cultural transmission. So I think that a story meme I would define as a story of an engine that enables it to go from one person to another. So I think in our sort of tools of analysis, we not only need to have narrative and stories, but this idea of story memes. So you might have the most potent, cogent story that appeals to you, but if it fails to emotionally connect with others, it would be a very, by definition, would have a very weak story meme, and therefore be, its transmission and ability to spread would affect its success.
Yes, and when you talk about a story having influence, think about the story of George Floyd. That went viral, like fire, like a blazing fire all around the world, because it resonated with the smaller stories that lots of people had, but it formed the connection. It seems as though a story like that interconnects with lots of other stories and sets everyone ablaze, because it's not a new story for them. It's a story that they see reflected, that they haven't articulated, but it reflects what they already believe. And so that's why it resonates, and it's like that ripple effect. It just spread within a few days. It was international.
But also, you got to look at the ingredients of it in terms of its meme qualities. For a meme to spread, it's got to be very coherent, easily remembered, easily pass-onable. And there you had, very simply, a black guy beaten up murdered by police. You saw the evidence of the film, and that's a story. And then the significance is this feeds into a wider narrative of discrimination against black people, and a wider narrative of we've got to stand up now and stop this, and so on. So you can see that it's not just the story quality that's important, but it's meme ability as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you mention the word quality again, I think with the social sciences, we focus very much on quality, and we know that stories can add quality to our lives. Whereas with the life sciences, the focus is very much more on quantity and being able to measure things. And in industry, in business, sometimes the focus is very much on quantifiable things, and people don't really want to listen to stories because they just want facts. They want facts that will improve their organization.
I would suggest actually their perception of what you've grown as quote fact is a story. So data doesn't change people's minds. It's the story accompanying the data that influences and creates change. And the potency of the story meme is its wider social impact.
Yeah, there's data, and there's also the operational efficiencies. It's like when the focus of the organization is to be more efficient, we just want to know, well, how can we work in a way that we're spending less and making more profit? So that is sometimes that is basically facts based on how we function. So it's more functional. It's not just about the data. It's about how we're actually doing things, analyzing rather than synthesizing.
I would still suggest that the saliency of what is like profit. So, for example, one person might say, I've done well there, I've sold this product and made a profit of £100. Another person assessing the same situation is, well, you've ripped that customer off and they're not going to come back tomorrow. So, we live in a world of complexity, and we each see the world in a unique, individual way, where facets of that reality will have different significance for different people.
Mm-hmm. There was a time before PowerPoint, before all of this technology, where people did simply communicate through stories, because that was the only way. Well, it's a very efficient way of remembering a lot of things. If you don't have a notepad and note pen, it's the
oral tradition underpinned, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I would challenge it, because a PowerPoint is a story. It might, in many cases, it might be a very bad story. Like I tell my students when I'm lecturing that there's no such thing as a bad lecture, in a sense that you learn a lesson of how not to lecture. So there's always, I believe a story is a way where we decode what we have around us and provide it and create a vehicle to enable us to comprehend add new dimensions, create an ongoing story around it. I have a saying: you never dream in bullet points. So it's a fundamental way our brains, from what the neuroscience suggests, work in that we receive information, but then we have an innate instinctive desire to put it into a story and narrative.
When you talk about lecturing, I do remember when I did my own MBA, one of my marketing lecturers, he was a storyteller. He was a very good storyteller. We could sit there and just listen to him for 2 hours, but we didn't learn any theories. He never referred to any, he just told us stories that he'd experienced working in different organizations. But when it came to preparing for the exam for marketing, we were at a loss. We had to simply rely on textbooks for that. So there are things, it's the thing with, like with the theoretical knowledge, with the factual knowledge that we need to learn to master a subject, we do need to have content that is not always transmissible in a story format.
I would challenge, because I believe everything is transmitted by a story that, as I say, it sounds like in most cases they're very bad story, very badly presented, very badly told stories, but everything is a story. There's not this sort of division of you and non-you in storytelling. What may be criticised is that in terms of the content transmission, the lecturer might have been better, you might have been better served as students had you heard the stories, but then given a guide to say, actually, you just need to read this theory, this theory, this theory. And I think one of the interesting dimensions from lockdown and, say, higher education having to go online is the appreciation, use and harnessing of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And rather than that lecturer saying, here's this theory, and just talk you through something you could easily read, I think a great educator would have said, here's 5 theories you need to read and understand, and here's what I tell you how they fit together, their significance, their saliency, and potency, and real life experience of them. So. As I say, I think there's a danger sometimes of people thinking storytelling is this sort of separate ingredient, but it really is integral in the same way like breathing, and sort of that in the same way we breathe. As soon as we comprehend, we then frame it within a story. As soon as we then engage with others, we share a story.
Mm-hmm. And so, with your work, then, what is it that remains a mystery to you? What is it that you're still exploring in terms of how these stories and creativity and culture, how it all interlinks with each other?
Well, as I referenced, so we're working on a global project called the Dublin Conversations, which has created a sort of grand universal theory of how we communicate. And it also helps identify our known unknowns and so on. And so clearly our known unknowns, we're going to learn more about how we trust, how we likability, about knowing and what makes things front of mind or being talked about. For me, one of my big challenge is the idea of confidence. So if you look at communications, the great communicators, they've got confidence. But when you read books on communication, I suspect no even gets no index reference, never gets a reference. And yet it's the key quality for outstanding performance and confidence in yourself. So you have an idea, an unawaited idea. Well, that then requires a certain degree of confidence that you're doing the right thing, that you can do what you're intending to do. And then when you engage with others, you've then got to sell the idea that you can have confidence in me, that to coexist, cooperate and collaborate, and confidence in terms of a narrative of the story, a time like the story of the future, that I'm confident that we're going to go forward together. So I had a drink with a dear old friend from university, known about 30, 40 years. And I said, yeah, do you know, all we've spoken about tonight is the future. We didn't spend 2 hours reminiscing, and I felt I took some encouragement there that both of us were seemingly very positive people with a vibrant outlook and obviously active doing things. So this area of confidence for me in terms of how it relates to communications, how it relates to creative performance, how it relates to fulfilling our purpose is the mission, like the ancient mariners had on their maps, dragons. Bits. That's the dragon for me in terms of like looking to find out more and discovering more and feeding that back into how I know and understand the world.
It's interesting that you talk about the future, because one of the most important aspects of leadership is that the leader is expected to be the one who can see the furthest. And
absolutely.
And a lot of people complain about our politicians who were not able to foresee the pandemic. They weren't able to foresee what was going to happen. And so, so this ability to be able to foresee and to imagine a future, like they call it horizon scanning. It's like, we have to horizon scan and be prepared and have a story already in place for actually anticipating that future which is imminent.
I would suggest that it's not only a future scan, which is a good tool. I like the quote from the science fiction writer William Gibson, who said that the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And so really, in addition to horizon scanning, it's almost like now scanning in terms of what is happening now. What do you feel instinctively, intuitively has potential for a better future? So absolutely right. And again, it's that confidence in yourself that on the surface, something might look like a bad deal, but intuitively, instinctively, you think there's something in this. And so that confidence in yourself, I think, is a fascinating subject. But I'd love to be guided and shown some way ahead in this, but it does seem an area where all of us could benefit from further research and investigation and understanding of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I do feel that leaders who lack confidence, they may have had confidence when they came into that leadership position, but when they lose that confidence, then their days are usually numbered.
And I think this concept almost like the ability to fake confidence is perhaps one of the greatest skills in life. Yeah,
but faking confidence, it's like that's what they call style over substance, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting area where the more we can understand it, the more we can manage, the more we can make better use of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. Well, Andy, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for your immense patience. I always love having a conversation and respect and value what you're doing. So if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know there.
Okay, I look forward to speaking with you soon, Andy.
Take care, Jessica. Bye now.
Bye-bye.